15. A Discovery. It was just after tea that the Bentley came up the drive of Merroway Court, a young and correct chauffeur at the wheel. Frankie went out to the front door. Sylvia and Roger came with her. "Is everything all right, Hawkins?" The chauffeur, who was, of course, Bobby in disguise, complete with moustache, touched his cap respectfully.
"Yes, m'lady. The Bentley's been completely repaired."
He produced a note.
"From his lordship, m'lady."
Frankie took it. "You will stay at the Angler's Arms in Staveley, Hawkins. I'll telephone in the morning."
"Very good, your ladyship."
Bobby turned and drove quickly down the drive. "It's a lovely car," said Sylvia. "You get some speed out of that," said Roger. "I do," admitted Frankie. She was satisfied that Roger hadn't recognized Bobby. She would have been surprised if he had. The uniform, the moustache, and the formal behavior, so uncharacteristic of Bobby, made him a very different man from the one Roger had met beside the body on the cliffside. The voice, too, had been excellent. Meanwhile, Bobby had settled into his room at the Angler's Arms and successfully created the part of Edward Hawkins, chauffeur to Lady Frances Derwent. Bobby knew nothing of the behaviour of chauffeurs in private life, but he imagined that an amount of superiority would be right. The young women employed at the Angler's Arms quickly showed that they clearly admired him, which made him feel he was doing well in his disguise. And he soon found that Frankie and her accident had provided the main topic of conversation in Staveley ever since it had happened. Frankie's letter had asked Bobby to get any local information he could, so he spoke to the pub landlord, a round, friendly person called Thomas Askew.
"Very nice little place you have here, Mr. Askew," said Bobby, managing to be both superior and kindly. "Very nice and comfortable."
Mr. Askew looked pleased.
"Is Merroway Court the only big place in the neighbourhood?" "Well, there's the Grange, Mr. Hawkins. It has been empty for years, until this American doctor took it. Nicholson, his name is. And if you ask me, Mr. Hawkins, there are some very strange things happening there."
The barmaid at this point remarked that Dr. Nicholson frightened her a bit.
"What strange things, Mr. Askew?"
said Bobby. Mr. Askew shook his head sadly.
"Many of the patients there don't want to be. They've been put into the Grange by their relations, and they can't get out without their relations' permission. I assure you, Mr. Hawkins, you wouldn't believe the screams and groans that go on there."
Here the barmaid joined in eagerly. "Why, one night a poor young woman escaped, in her nightgown she was, and the doctor and a couple of nurses were out looking for her. 'Oh, don't let them take me back,' she was crying out. It was so sad. She said that she was rich and that her relations had put her away. But the people at the Grange took her back, they did, and the doctor explained she'd got a persecution mania, meaning she thought everyone was against her. But I've often wondered if what she said was true, and there's no way of knowing how the patients at the Grange are really treated." Bobby listened to all this with great interest, and then said he was going for a walk before going to bed. The Grange was, he knew, on the other side of the village from Merroway Court, so he turned in that direction. A lot of what he had heard could, of course, be explained. If Nicholson ran a place for curing drug takers, there would be strange sounds coming from it. But all the same, the story of the escaping girl worried Bobby. At this point in his thoughts, Bobby arrived at a high wall with an entrance of metal gates, which were locked. He moved farther along the road, measuring the wall with his eye. Would it be possible to climb over? Suddenly, he came across a little door. To his surprise, it was not locked. Bit of a mistake here, thought Bobby with a grin. He slipped through and found himself on a path, which twisted through bushes. Without warning, at a sharp turn, the path ended when it came to an open space close to the house, and Bobby stepped full into the moonlight before he could stop himself. At that moment, a woman came round the corner of the house. She was walking very softly, glancing from side to side with, or so it seemed to Bobby, the fear of someone being hunted. Suddenly, she stopped completely still and stood, moving from side to side as though she would fall. Bobby rushed forward and caught her. Her lips were white. He had never seen such awful fear on any human face before. "It's all right," he said reassuringly, in a very low voice. The girl moaned faintly, her eyelids half closed. "I'm so frightened," she whispered. "I'm so terribly frightened." "What's the matter?" said Bobby. Suddenly, she seemed to hear something. She moved quickly away from Bobby. "Go away," she said. "I want to help you," said Bobby. "Do you?" She looked at him, a strange, searching look. Then she shook her head. "No one can help me." "I can," said Bobby. "Tell me what it is that frightens you so." She shook her head. "Not now. Oh, quick, they're coming. You can't help me unless you go now. At once, at once." Bobby gave in to her urgency. With a whispered, "I'm at the Angler's Arms," he ran back along the path. Suddenly, he heard footsteps on the path in front of him. Bobby stepped back quickly into the bushes, just before a man passed, but it was too dark to see his face. When he was sure the man was far enough away, Bobby got onto the path again, still trying to get over his shock at meeting the frightened girl. For he had recognized her beyond any possible doubt. She was the young woman in the photograph which had so mysteriously disappeared. Chapter 16. Bobby becomes a lawyer.
"It's extremely annoying," Frankie said, "to have to go up to London today, but the letter that Hawkins brought from Father yesterday says I must."
But, said Roger, who had come out to say goodbye to her as she left Merroway Court, "you'll be coming back this evening, won't you?" He took her hand and held it between his hands. "You are coming back," he said with strange firmness. Frankie laughed.
"Of course I am."
Bobby, who was holding the car door open for her to get into the front passenger seat, touched his cap respectfully, then got in himself and drove off. "Frankie," he said, "I found the girl who was in the photograph I found in the dead man's pocket."
"Oh, Bobby, where?"
"In Dr. Nicholson's nursing home." Bobby described what had happened the night before.
"Then we are on the right track," Frankie said. "And Dr. Nicholson is mixed up in all this. I'm afraid of that man."
"What's he like?"
"Oh, big, and he has a powerful personality. And he watched me so closely that I felt he knew the truth about me."
She described the dinner party and Dr. Nicholson's questions about her accident.
"I think he was suspicious," she finished.
"It's certainly strange that he went into details like that. But have you any idea now what's going on, Frankie?"
"Well, I think that Dr. Nicholson's nursing home would be a very good cover-up for illegal drug dealing. He might be pretending to cure drug addicts when he's really supplying them with the stuff."
"That's possible," agreed Bobby.
"And I haven't told you yet about Henry Bassington French," said Frankie.
Bobby listened to her description of Henry's strange behaviour. "And
What about Roger Bassington French? He asked.
There I'm puzzled, said Frankie. I have a strange feeling that he's innocent.
No, said Bobby, he can't be. No one else could have exchanged the photographs.
I know, said Frankie, but perhaps there's an innocent explanation.
I don't see that there can be. If we only had some idea who the dead man really was.
Oh, but I have, Bobby. I'm almost sure he was a man called Alan Carstairs.
Once more she told him everything she'd found out.
You know, said Bobby, we really are learning things. Now, we'll assume that you are right about Alan Carstairs. From what you say, he's lived abroad most of his adult life. He had very few friends in England, and if he disappeared, he wasn't likely to be missed. So, Carstairs comes down to Staveley with the Rivingtons. Now, did he get them to bring him deliberately, or was it just chance? And did he then come across the girl by accident just as I did? But he must have known her, or he wouldn't have had her photograph on him.
Or, said Frankie thoughtfully,
he was already on the track of Nicholson and his gang for some reason.
And used the Rivingtons to get to Staveley.
That's a possible theory, said Frankie.
Or he may have been on the track of the girl, said Bobby. Maybe he knew her. She may have been kidnapped, and he came to England to find her.
But if he had tracked her down to Staveley, why would he go off to Wales?
Asked Frankie. Obviously there's a lot we don't know yet, said Bobby.
Evans, for example, said Frankie thoughtfully. We don't have any clues yet about Evans, so that part of it must be connected with Wales.
Frankie suddenly realised where they were.
Bobby, we've reached London. Where are we going, and what are we doing here?
That's for you to say, said Bobby. I don't even know why we've come up to town.
The journey to London was only an excuse so that I could talk with you privately. I couldn't risk being seen walking about at Staveley talking to my chauffeur. I used the letter that we pretended had come from Father as an excuse for driving up to town. Well, I think we'd better go to my house in Brook Street. Your garage may be watched.
Bobby, who lived in some rooms over the garage, agreed. At Brook Street, they went upstairs to the big drawing room.
There's one other thing, said Frankie. On the day you were poisoned, Roger Bassington French was at Staveley, but according to him, Nicholson was away at a conference in London.
And he has access to morphia, said Bobby. It fits in nicely.
Frankie picked up a telephone directory.
What are you going to do? Bobby asked.
I'm looking up the name Rivington. There's a few of them, but I think the Colonel Rivington, who lives in Onslow Square, or Mr. R. Rivington in Tite Street, are the most likely ones. The Rivingtons, Bobby, have got to be seen immediately.
But what are we going to say?
Frankie thought, then said,
Do you feel you could be a lawyer?
But lawyers never make personal visits, do they? Surely they write and ask someone to come and see them at their office.
This firm does things differently, said Frankie.
She left the room and returned with a card.
Mr. Frederick Spragg, she said, handing it to Bobby. You are a member of the firm of Spragg, Jenkinson and Spragg, and their father's lawyers. The only Spragg left there is about 100, and he adores me. I'll fix things with him if the Rivingtons discover you're not a solicitor.
What about clothes? I can't go in my chauffeur's uniform.
We'd better attack Father's wardrobe.
A quarter of an hour later, Bobby stood looking at himself in Lord Marchington's mirror.
With these expensive clothes on me, I feel much more confident. Now then, Frankie, do you think your father could lend me a hat?
Chapter 17. Mrs. Rivington Talks.
Colonel Rivington was out. Mrs. Rivington, however, was at home. Bobby was shown into a beautifully and expensively furnished drawing room and shook hands with Mrs. Rivington, who was beautifully and expensively dressed.
"I must apologize for coming to see you without warning, Mrs. Rivington," said Bobby, "but the matter is urgent. It's about our client, Mr. Alan Carstairs," he said. "He may have mentioned that we were working for him."
"I believe he did," said Mrs. Rivington. She was clearly the type of woman who would agree to something rather than admit she didn't know about it, a woman with more beauty than brains.
"About Mr. Carstairs," said Bobby.
"We haven't seen him for some time, about a month."
"When you took him down to Staveley?"
"Yes. He'd just arrived in London, and we were going down to Meroway Court for lunch, and up to Scotland next day for a couple of weeks, and Hubert really wanted to see Carstairs because he likes him so much, and so I said, 'My dear, let's take him down to the Bassington Frenches with us. They won't mind.' And we did. And of course, they didn't mind." She came breathlessly to a pause.
"Did he tell you his reasons for being in England?" asked Bobby.
"Oh, it was because of that millionaire, Savage, who was a friend of his. Savage's doctor told him he had cancer, and he killed himself. So sad."
"And did Mr. Carstairs know the Bassington Frenches?"
"Oh, no, but I think he liked them, though he was very quiet on the way back to London. I think something had upset him."
"You don't know what it was? Did he meet any of the neighbours, perhaps?"
"No, unless he did so when he went out for a walk after lunch. But he did ask a lot of questions about some people who lived near the Bassington Frenches, some doctor."
"Dr. Nicholson?"
"Yes. Alan wanted to know all about him and his wife. It seemed strange when he didn't know them. But what is it you wanted to know about Mr. Carstairs?"
"I really wanted his address," said Bobby. "We've just had an important telegram from New York and need his instructions, but he hasn't left an address. And having heard him talk about you, I thought you might have news of him."
"Oh, I see," said Mrs. Rivington. "Well, I am very sorry, but I have no idea where he's staying now."
"I do apologise for taking up so much of your time," said Bobby, getting up.
Back in Brook Street, he and Frankie talked about what they had now learnt.
"It looks as though chance took Carstairs to the Bassington Frenches," said Frankie. "So it's Nicholson who is at the heart of the mystery."
"Do you still insist that Roger Bassington French is innocent?" Bobby asked coldly.
"I can't believe he is a criminal."
"You can't deny the evidence that he changed the photograph."
"Damn the photograph," said Frankie.
Bobby drove up to Meroway Court in silence. Frankie got out of the car and went into the house without looking back. She opened the door of the library and stopped. Dr. Nicholson was sitting on the sofa, holding Sylvia Bassington French's hands. Sylvia jumped to her feet and came across to Frankie.
"He's been telling me about Henry's drug addiction." She was crying. "It's terrible."
And she ran out of the room. Dr. Nicholson had got up. His eyes, watchful as always, met Frankie's.
"Poor lady,"
he said.
"It has been a great shock, but it is best that she knows the truth. I want her to persuade her husband to become a patient at my nursing home."
Chapter 18. The Girl of the Photograph. On Bobby's return to the Angler's Arms, he was told that someone was waiting to see him.
"It's a lady. You'll find her in the little sitting room."
Wondering who it could be, Bobby went into the room. Sitting on a chair was a slim figure dressed in black, the girl of the photograph. Her hands were shaking, and her large eyes held a terrified question. You said you'd help me.
Of course I'll help you, Bobby said. Don't be frightened. You're quite safe now.
Who are you? She asked. You're not really a chauffeur, are you?
No, but that doesn't matter now. Trust me, and tell me all about it.
You must think I'm completely mad.
No.
Yes, coming here like this. But I was so frightened. Bobby took her hand firmly.
Look here, everything's going to be all right. You're safe now.
When you stepped out into the moonlight the other night, she said, it was like a dream, and I decided later that I would come and find you, and tell you everything. But you'll think I've gone mad from being in that place with those truly mad people.
No, I won't. Please, tell me.
She stared straight in front of her. I'm afraid I'm going to be murdered.
Murdered? Bobby exclaimed. Who wants to murder you?
My husband.
Your husband? Who are you? He asked. And who is your husband?
It was her turn to look surprised. Don't you know? I'm Moira Nicholson. My husband is Dr. Nicholson.
And you're telling me your husband wants to murder you?
Yes. Strange things have happened to me. Accidents.
Accidents? Said Bobby sharply.
Yes. Oh, I know it sounds mad, but he reversed the car, not seeing I was there, he said later. I managed to jump aside, and there were some pills that were in the wrong bottle. It's exhausting me watching out for myself all the time, trying to save my life.
Why does your husband want to kill you? Asked Bobby.
Because he wants to marry Sylvia Bassington French. He's trying to get Mr. Bassington French to come to the Grange as a patient. Then something would happen to him there, I'm sure. She shivered. He's got some power over Mr. Bassington French, but I don't know what it is.
Bassington French takes morphia, said Bobby.
Is that it? Jasper gives it to him, I suppose.
It comes by post.
Jasper's as cunning as a fox. If he posts the drugs to Henry Bassington French, no one will know they're from him. She shivered. All sorts of things happen at the Grange. People come there to get better, and they don't. They get worse.
Bobby said, You say your husband wants to marry Mrs. Bassington French.
Moira nodded. He's crazy about her.
And she?
I don't know, said Moira slowly. She seems to be a simple woman, fond of her husband and little boy. But sometimes I've wondered if she is an entirely different woman from the one we all think she is. If she isn't playing a part.
What about the brother, Roger? Asked Bobby.
I don't know much about him. He's nice, I think, but he's completely fooled by Jasper. Bobby was silent a minute or two, trying to decide what to do.
Look here, he said. I'm going to ask you a question straight out. Did you know a man called Alan Carstairs, and at some time give him your photograph?
He saw her cheeks go red. Yes.
Has he been down here to see you since you were married?
Yes. I don't know how he knew I was living here. I had never written to him since my marriage.
But he found out and came. About a month ago?
Yes.
Did you tell Carstairs your fears about your husband and the nursing home?
She shook her head. I tried not to show in any way that my marriage hadn't been a success.
But he might have guessed it all the same, said Bobby gently.
I suppose he might,
she admitted in a low voice. Do you think that he knew anything about your husband? That he suspected, for instance, that this nursing home place mightn't be quite what it seemed to be?
It's possible, she said at last. He asked one or two strange questions. But no, I don't think he can really have known anything about it.
Bobby was silent again for a few minutes. Then he said, Would you call your husband a jealous man? Jealous, for instance, about you?
Yes, very. He thinks he owns me, you see?
She shivered again. Then she asked suddenly,
You're not connected with the police, are you?
Oh, no.
I wondered, I mean...
Bobby looked down at his chauffeur's uniform. It's a long story.
You are Lady Frances Derwent's chauffeur, aren't you? So the owner of the pub here said. I met her at dinner the other night.
I know. He paused. We've got to have a conversation with Frankie to discuss things. Do you think you could ring up and get her to meet you somewhere? I know it must seem really strange to you that I can't do it, but it won't be when I've explained.
Moira stood. Very well.
At the door she stopped.
Alan, she said, Alan Carstairs. Did you say you'd seen him?
And, Bobby thought, shocked, she doesn't know he's dead. He said, Ring up Lady Frances. Then I'll tell you everything.
Chapter 19. A Meeting of Three.
Moira came back a few minutes later.
I've asked her to meet me at a place where we can sit near the river, she said.
While they waited for Frankie, Bobby felt he must try and explain everything that had happened. There's a lot to tell you, he said. To begin with, I'm not a chauffeur, and my name isn't Hawkins. It's Jones. Bobby Jones. I come from Marchbolt in Wales.
Clearly Marchbolt meant nothing to her.
Bobby went bravely to the terrible news he had to tell her. I'm afraid I'm going to give you rather a shock. This friend of yours, Alan Carstairs, he's dead.
To his surprise, she looked sad, but that was all.
He fell over the cliff at Marchbolt, Bobby said. He had your photograph in his pocket.
Did he?
She gave a sweet, sad smile.
Dear Alan, he was very loyal.
Did he tell you he was going to Wales? She shook her head. You don't know anyone called Evans, do you? Said Bobby.
Evans? No. It's a very common name, of course, but I can't remember anybody. What is he?
That's just what we don't know. Oh, here's Frankie. Frankie came hurrying along the path. Hello, Frankie, said Bobby. We've got to have a serious talk. To begin with, it's Mrs. Nicholson who is the original of the photograph.
Oh,
said Frankie. She looked at Moira and suddenly laughed.
My dear, she said to Bobby, now I see why the sight of Mrs. Cayman was such a shock to you.
Exactly, said Bobby. Moira was looking confused.
Let me explain,
Frankie said. She went straight into the story. But once she had explained their conclusion, that Bassington French must have pushed Carstairs over the cliff, she was brought to a stop by the look on Moira's face.
Roger Bassington French?
Moira's voice was amused.
Your photograph disappeared, and only he could have taken it.
I see,
said Moira thoughtfully. Facts are facts, said Bobby.
No.
Moira shook her head.
Roger might be weak or wild, but pushing someone over a cliff, no, I can't imagine it.
But he must have taken that photograph, said Bobby.
Yes, it seems very strange.
Moira paused for a moment, and then said unexpectedly,
Why don't you ask him?